Hey everyone, I'm Sarah, I'm 23 years old, and I just graduated from Yale with my master's in architecture. If you had told me 6 months ago that I'd be here making a video about how my own parents tried to poison me at my graduation party, I would have called you insane. But here we are. If you're watching this, let me know in the comments where you're from, and hit that like and subscribe button, because this is the most insane story you'll ever hear. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. So picture this. I'm at my graduation party, surrounded by Connecticut's elite, champagne flowing, everyone congratulating me on my achievement. And then I see my father, Richard Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Real Estate Empire, carefully slipping a white powder into my martini when he thinks no one is looking. My heart literally stopped. My own father was trying to poison me. But before I tell you how I survived that night, you need to understand my family. The Mitchells weren't your typical loving household, not by a long shot. My father, Richard, built Mitchell Properties from a small construction company into a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions. We're talking luxury resorts, high-end developments, the kind of places where celebrities vacation. His reputation for ruthless business tactics was legendary in Connecticut. Competitors would mysteriously lose permits or face sudden zoning issues. But publicly, he was the philanthropist, the family man, the guy who donated to every charity gala in Greenwich. My mother, Patricia, was a former Miss Connecticut who never quite got over not winning Miss America. She married my father and threw herself into being the perfect socialite wife. Our house was featured in Architectural Digest twice. She hosted charity events that were the talk of the state. But behind closed doors, she was calculating, cold, and obsessed with maintaining our family's image. Then there was my perfect brother, Brandon, 3 years older than me. Straight A's at prep school, Harvard Business School, now the COO of Dad's company. Mom and Dad never missed his lacrosse games or business presentations. They proudly displayed his awards throughout our Greenwich mansion. When he spoke at dinner, they hung on every word like he was delivering the State of the Union. My experience? Completely different. Despite being valedictorian at my prep school, despite getting into Yale, my achievements were always met with this cold indifference. That's what we expect from a Mitchell, Dad would say, without looking up from the Wall Street Journal. When I won a national architecture competition my sophomore year, Mom's only comment was that my hair looked messy in the photos. They attended my events only when it would have looked suspicious if they hadn't. Even then, they'd check their phones the entire time, making it clear they had better places to be. From childhood, they had my entire life mapped out. I would study business, join the family company, and eventually run the development side while Brandon handled operations. My protests were ignored, dismissed as teenage rebellion that I'd eventually grow out of. But here's the thing, I developed a passion for sustainable architecture in high school. I wanted to design buildings that worked with the environment, not against it. When I learned about green building techniques, solar design using recycled materials, something just clicked. This was what I wanted to do with my life. My father called it tree hugger nonsense. During my junior year, I applied to Yale's architecture program. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Dad threatened to cut me off financially. Mom cried about family duty and how I was betraying everything they'd worked for. I stood my ground. I argued that I could still make a difference in the world, maybe even help the family business go green. After weeks of silent treatment, they relented, but with conditions. They'd pay for my education, but I had to minor in business and intern at their company every summer. College gave me some freedom, but the pressure escalated every year. Every holiday break was filled with passive-aggressive comments about my phase and how I'd eventually come to my senses. They'd leave job descriptions for positions at Mitchell Properties on my desk. When I got an internship with an environmental nonprofit instead of working for them one summer, they literally threatened to stop paying my tuition. I took out loans for my final year rather than give in. What they didn't know until recently was that my maternal grandmother, Eleanor Whitman, had left me a significant inheritance in a trust. Grandma Eleanor had been a pioneering architect herself back in the 1960s, one of the first women to design major commercial buildings. She'd been forced to work in the shadow of male partners her entire career, but she'd been quietly brilliant. Before she passed when I was 16, she made me promise to follow my own path. "Sarah," she said, holding my hands in her hospital bed, "don't let them clip your wings like they did mine." The trust was set up to become accessible when I turned 25, or graduated with my master's degree, whichever came first. $15 million that would give me complete financial independence. The catch? If I died before receiving it, the money would go to my parents as my next of kin. My parents discovered the inheritance 3 months before my graduation when their attorney accidentally mentioned it during a family business meeting. Brandon told me later that Dad had gone white with rage when he found out. The trust was ironclad, set up with independent trustees, and there was nothing they could do to touch it. But here's what really set them off. I'd been quietly documenting their business practices for years. I'd found environmental reports they'd buried, permits they'd falsified, communities they'd displaced without proper compensation. I'd even taken photos of illegal dumping at their construction sites. I wasn't planning to do anything with the information initially. I just wanted to understand what my family was really involved in. But the more I learned, the more disgusted I became. Mitchell Properties wasn't just ignoring environmental regulations. They were actively destroying pristine ecosystems for profit. The final straw came 2 months before graduation, when I found evidence that they'd bribed state officials to get permits for a resort that was supposed to be built in a protected watershed. Hundreds of families downstream depended on that water source. I confronted my father in his study one evening, spreading the documents across his massive mahogany desk. "Dad, what is this?" He barely glanced at the papers. "Business, Sarah. Something you wouldn't understand. This is a protected area. Building here is illegal." "Says who?" "Some tree huggers in Washington who've never created a job in their lives." He leaned back in his leather chair, totally calm. "We employ 3,000 people in this state. We bring in tax revenue. We create beautiful spaces for families to enjoy. By destroying other families' water supply? Every business has costs, Sarah. Environmental regulations are just another form of taxation. Smart businessmen find ways around them." I stared at him, really seeing my father for the first time. I could report this. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Dad stood up slowly, walking around the desk until he was towering over me. "Report it to who? With what proof?" "Those documents are proprietary company information. Taking them would be theft." "I already copied them." His face went through several emotions before settling on cold fury. "You have no idea what you're playing with, little girl. This company supports hundreds of families. Your education, this house, everything you've ever had comes from this business. And you want to destroy it over some fish and trees? You're just a leech, Sarah, always taking from this family and giving nothing back. I want you to do the right thing." "The right thing," he laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The right thing is family loyalty, something you've never understood." I left his study that night, knowing our relationship had fundamentally changed, but I had no idea how far they'd go to protect their empire. The weeks leading up to graduation were strangely quiet. My parents stopped their usual barrage of calls and texts about job interviews at their company. Instead, they suddenly took interest in my graduation plans. Mom called to say they wanted to throw me a proper celebration befitting a Mitchell. Their sudden change in behavior should have been my first red flag, but honestly, I was just relieved they weren't fighting me anymore. Graduation day dawned perfect. Bright blue May sky, not a cloud in sight. I stood in front of my dorm room mirror, adjusting my cap, a mixture of pride and anxiety churning in my stomach. After 5 years of hard work, maintaining a 3.9 GPA, while deliberately charting a course away from my family's expectations, I'd done it. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Car service picking you up at 9:30. Don't be late. The photographer will want family portraits before the ceremony." I met my parents outside Woolsey Hall. Dad was checking emails on his phone, while Mom scrutinized my appearance. "Could you not have done something more with your hair?" she asked by way of greeting. "The photographer will be taking family portraits later. No congratulations, no pride, just criticism." Brandon stood slightly apart, giving me a small, supportive smile. He'd been the only family member who'd ever shown any genuine interest in my architecture projects. "Sarah," the voice of my best friend Jessica, cut through the tension. She rushed over, her own graduation gown fluttering behind her. Jessica had been my lifeline throughout Yale, the sister I'd chosen for myself. We'd spent countless late nights in the studio, supporting each other through critiques and celebrating each other's successes. "We made it," Jessica hugged me tightly, whispering, Your parents still look like they smell something bad whenever they see you." "Some things never change," I whispered back. As Jessica and I chatted excitedly about the ceremony and our plans to share an apartment in New York while starting our careers, I noticed my parents step aside for what appeared to be an intense conversation. I couldn't hear most of it, but Dad's words drifted over. "We need to handle this situation today, before it gets out of hand." Mom nodded grimly, then caught me watching them. Her face immediately transformed into a practiced social smile. "Darling, we should find our seats. The ceremony will be starting soon." The graduation ceremony itself passed in a blur of speeches, name-calling, and the satisfying weight of my diploma. When Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, Master of Architecture, summa cum laude, echoed through the auditorium, I heard Jessica cheering wildly. My parents applauded politely, their expressions unreadable. After the ceremony, the car service whisked us to the Greenwich Yacht Club, where my parents had rented the entire waterfront terrace for my graduation celebration. I was stunned by the extravagance: ice sculptures, champagne fountains, gourmet catering stations, and even a small jazz orchestra playing on the deck. Fresh flowers covered every surface, and a professional photographer circulated among the early arriving guests. "Quite the production your parents have put on," commented Professor David Thompson, approaching me with a glass of sparkling water. He'd been my favorite professor and something of a mentor, one of the few connections to my family's world that I actually valued. "Congratulations on your outstanding achievement, Sarah. Your senior project was remarkable. That sustainable housing design could really change how we think about low-income development." "Thank you, Professor Thompson. It is a bit much, isn't it?" I gestured at the elaborate setup. Not really their style, at least not for me. I scanned the growing crowd. Actually, I'm surprised by the guest list. Half these people I barely know. Professor Thompson followed my gaze to where my father was speaking with two men in expensive suits. "Business associates," he explained. "And over there with your mother, that's Marcus Rivera, your family's attorney." He lowered his voice. "Things have been tense at the company lately. Rumors of irregularities in some permit applications. Your father's been in closed-door meetings for weeks." My stomach tightened. "What kind of irregularities?" He shook his head. "Nothing concrete, but be careful, Sarah. Your parents seem—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Particularly invested in keeping the Mitchell legacy intact right now." As the party reached full swing, I noticed something odd. My parents were watching me constantly, not with pride, not even with their usual disappointment, but with a calculating intensity that made my skin crawl. Whenever I moved to a new conversation group, one of them would casually reposition themselves to keep me in their line of sight. Brandon sidled up beside me as I grabbed a canapé from a passing waiter. "Something weird is going on," he murmured. "Dad asked me 3 times if you'd mentioned your post-graduation plans, and Mom keeps checking her watch like she's waiting for something." Before I could respond, Dad clinked his champagne glass, signaling for attention. "In 15 minutes, we'll have a special martini toast to our graduate," he announced, his businessman smile firmly in place. "Everyone make sure you have a glass for the occasion." I watched as waiters began preparing martini glasses on silver trays. Dad beckoned to the head bartender, pointing out a specific bottle of top-shelf vodka. "That one," I heard him say, "for the family only." With 15 minutes until the toast, I excused myself to use the restroom. The main facilities had a line, so I slipped down a service corridor I'd noticed earlier. As I approached the employee restroom, I heard angry whispers coming from around the corner. "Are you absolutely certain this is necessary?" Mom's voice, tense and higher than normal. "Do you want to lose everything we've built?" Dad hissed back. "The EPA investigation is gaining momentum. If they find those environmental reports Sarah copied, we're finished. The trust gives her enough money to be completely independent. What if she decides to play environmental crusader and exposes our business practices? She's always been self-righteous enough to do it." "But drugging her at her own graduation party, Richard. We talked about this. It's not going to kill her. Just make her sick enough to be hospitalized. Food poisoning, maybe a bad reaction to something. That gives us time to handle the paperwork and move some assets offshore before the trust disbursement." The lawyers confirmed. "If she dies before the official transfer next week, it reverts to us as her next of kin." "Keep your voice down," Mom whispered harshly. "Someone could hear us." My blood turned to ice as I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. They were planning to poison me. My own parents. The realization was so monstrous, my mind initially rejected it. But the architect in me processed Dad's words analytically. Just enough to make her sick. A non-lethal dose of something that would present as food poisoning, but serious enough for hospitalization. I slipped back down the corridor before they could discover me, my hands shaking so badly I could barely check my makeup in the main bathroom mirror. I needed to appear normal, to think clearly. Years of navigating my parents' emotional manipulation had taught me to compartmentalize. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. Back at the party, I observed with new eyes as waiters arranged martini glasses on a special tray. Dad approached, examining the glasses carefully before selecting one and placing it slightly apart from the others. The special bottle of Grey Goose was opened, and the bartender began filling glasses. Dad hovered nearby, ensuring he knew exactly which glass was which. I made my way to Jessica, keeping my voice steady through sheer willpower. "I need you to do something for me, no questions asked." Jessica immediately nodded, always loyal without hesitation, always. "Record the toast on your phone. Get my father in the frame as much as possible, especially when he hands out the martinis." "Is everything okay?" she asked, her eyes concerned. "Just a precaution," I replied, forcing a smile. "Family drama, as usual." The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. My architecture training kicked in as I considered what Dad might use. It would need to be something difficult to detect, something that could plausibly occur naturally or appear to be food poisoning. Perhaps a compound from their construction site chemicals, something not yet on standard toxicology screens. I would need to recognize the symptoms quickly. Nausea and vomiting would likely be the first signs, followed by abdominal pain, dizziness, or respiratory issues depending on the substance. If I could identify it quickly enough, I could tell medical personnel exactly what to test for. As Dad called everyone together for the toast, I realized with crystal clarity that I needed evidence. If I simply refused the martini, they would try again another way. I needed proof of their attempt, something concrete that couldn't be explained away. The moment of the toast approached with surreal quality. Waiters distributed champagne to the general guests, while Dad personally handled the glasses from the special bottle. "The family should have the finest vodka for this special occasion," he announced jovially to nearby guests. He handed glasses to Mom, then Brandon, then extended one specifically to me, his eyes meeting mine with a smile that never reached them. I watched in slow motion as he presented the glass to me, and with absolute certainty, I saw the slightly cloudy quality at the bottom where a powder hadn't fully dissolved. Dad's Yale class ring glinted as he held the stem, practically forcing the glass into my hand. "To Sarah," he said loudly, raising his own glass. "May your future be everything you deserve." The double meaning wasn't lost on me as I accepted the poisoned martini, careful not to let it touch my lips. As the guests prepared to take their first sip, Mom interjected smoothly. "Before we drink, Richard, why don't you say a few words about our daughter on this special day?" Dad cleared his throat, shifting into his public speaking persona. "Sarah has always been determined," he began, carefully selecting words that sounded complimentary to outsiders, but carried years of disapproval that only I could hear. "While she's chosen an unconventional path, today we celebrate her academic achievement." As he continued his passive-aggressive speech, my mind raced. Jessica was recording as promised, her phone discreetly capturing everything. I needed to act now, before the toast concluded. The martini in my hand might as well have been a live grenade. "And to Brandon," Dad added, surprising everyone by deviating from the traditional toast format, "who has shown what a true Mitchell can accomplish in the business world. The perfect example of family loyalty." Brandon smiled uncomfortably, clearly caught off guard by being included in what should have been my moment. And in that instant, I made my decision. "Speaking of my amazing brother," I said, stepping forward with a bright smile. "I wouldn't be here without his support." I turned to Brandon, raising my glass. "He deserves a proper toast, too." In fact, I held out my martini toward him. "This special reserve vodka Dad selected is too good not to share. Take mine, Brandon, I insist." Before anyone could react, I had pressed my untouched glass into Brandon's hand and smoothly taken his partially drunk glass. Dad's face froze in a mask of horror he couldn't publicly display, while Mom's knuckles went white around her own glass. To family, I declared, raising Brandon's safe martini while looking directly into Dad's eyes. Confusion flickered across Brandon's face, but social training took over. He smiled and raised my glass. To family, he echoed, and drank deeply from the poisoned martini. I sipped from his original glass, never breaking eye contact with Dad. His face had gone ashen, a thin sheen of sweat appearing on his forehead as he realized what had happened. Mom glanced rapidly between Brandon and him, her practiced smile becoming brittle at the edges. The moment passed, guests applauded, conversations resumed, and the jazz quartet began playing again. I circulated through the crowd, making small talk while keeping Brandon in my peripheral vision. Guilt and fear battled within me. I hadn't had time to think of another solution, but I had just allowed my brother to drink poison meant for me. The dose was supposed to be non-lethal according to what I'd overheard, but what if Dad had lied to Mom? What if Brandon reacted badly to whatever compound it contained? 34 minutes after the toast, it happened. I was speaking with Professor Thompson when I heard a gasp from across the terrace. Brandon had been talking with one of Dad's business associates when he suddenly pressed his hand to his forehead, swaying slightly. "I feel really strange," I heard him say, his voice slurring uncharacteristically, really dizzy all of a sudden. I pushed through the crowd just as Brandon's knees buckled. The associate caught him awkwardly as he slumped forward. "Help," the man called. "Something's wrong." My parents rushed over, genuine panic in their eyes now that their golden child was affected instead of their disappointment. Dad reached Brandon first, cradling his head as he began to mumble incoherently. His skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and sweat beaded on his forehead. "Call an ambulance," Mom shrieked. All composure abandoned. Professor Thompson appeared at my side, his medical background from his pre-architecture days kicking in as he checked Brandon's pulse. "His heart rate is elevated and irregular," he reported, loosening Brandon's collar. "What was he doing before this happened?" "He just had a martini at the toast," the associate answered. "He seemed fine, then suddenly—" Dad's eyes snapped to mine, realization and fury mixing with fear. I stared back unflinchingly. "The ambulance is on its way," someone announced. 5 minutes out. I knelt beside Brandon, taking his hand. "I'll go downstairs to direct the paramedics," I told my parents firmly. They nodded distractedly, all attention on Brandon, who had begun to tremble slightly. In the privacy of the elevator, I pulled out my phone and called Jessica. "Meet me in the lobby right now," I instructed. "Bring your phone with the recording, it's an emergency." Jessica was waiting when the elevator doors opened. "Brandon collapsed," I explained rapidly, walking toward the entrance. "I need you to give a copy of that toast recording to the paramedics and tell them I suspect poisoning. Then send me a backup." "Poisoning?" Jessica repeated, horrified. "What the hell is going on, Sarah?" "I'll explain everything later. Please, just trust me." The ambulance sirens were audible now, growing closer. When the paramedics arrived, I approached the first one. "My brother has collapsed upstairs. Symptoms include dizziness, disorientation, irregular heartbeat, and tremors. I have reason to believe he ingested a toxic substance in his martini." The paramedic looked at me sharply. "You suspect poisoning based on what?" "I'm an architecture graduate with extensive chemistry coursework. The symptoms presented suddenly about 30 minutes after consumption. I also have video evidence that—" Before I could finish, my parents burst from the elevator with Professor Thompson supporting a semi-conscious Brandon between them. The paramedics rushed forward with a gurney, their training taking over as they quickly assessed his condition. "Please help him," Mom sobbed, her mascara running down her cheeks. "He just collapsed." "BP 90/60 and dropping," one paramedic reported. "Pulse 120 and irregular." As they loaded Brandon into the ambulance, Dad turned to me, his voice low and dangerous. "What did you do?" "Nothing," I replied calmly. "He drank from my glass, remember? The special martini you selected just for me." His face contorted with rage and fear. "You switched the glasses, deliberately. You knew?" "Knew what, Dad? That you put something in my drink? Why would I think that?" I held his gaze steadily. "Unless you did." "He needs family with him," a paramedic interrupted. "One person can ride along." "I'll go," Mom insisted, already climbing in. "We'll follow in the car," Dad said, grabbing my arm painfully. all of us. The ride to Greenwich Hospital was tense silence. Dad drove while I sat in the back seat, Jessica having promised to meet me there. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Video sent to your email. Shows you clearly switching glasses after your father handed you a specific one. What do I tell the police when they arrive? Police. Of course there would be police if poisoning was suspected. I texted back quickly. Tell them everything you saw. Show them the video. In the emergency room, chaos reigned. Brandon had been rushed into a treatment area with Mom wailing dramatically to anyone who would listen about her precious son and how he'd just collapsed for no reason. I approached the nurse's station directly. I need to speak with my brother's doctor immediately. I have reason to believe he ingested a toxin, and I may know what it is. The nurse looked skeptical until I added, I have a master's degree in architecture with extensive chemistry training. Please, time might be critical. Minutes later, I was speaking with Dr. Patricia Williams, the emergency physician treating Brandon. Your brother is experiencing symptoms consistent with anticholinergic poisoning, she explained. Elevated heart rate, confusion, dilated pupils, dry mouth. We're treating his symptoms while running toxicology screens. You need to specifically test for modified benzodiazepine derivatives, I said. My father has access to research chemicals through his real estate development partnerships. They're testing compounds that wouldn't show up on standard tox screens. Dr. Williams's eyebrows rose. That's a very specific suggestion. Why do you suspect this particular compound? I took a deep breath. Because I believe my father intentionally added it to my martini glass, but my brother drank from it instead. Her professional demeanor didn't change, but she reached for the phone. I need to contact the police. Within an hour, the emergency room had transformed into a crime scene. 2 detectives interviewed staff, while a uniformed officer stood outside Brandon's treatment room. My parents had been separated for questioning, Mom loudly protesting the absurd accusations, while Dad demanded his attorney. I sat in a small consultation room with Detective Maria Santos, a serious woman with kind eyes that belied her no-nonsense demeanor. Walk me through what happened again, she requested, taking detailed notes. I recounted everything, from the overheard conversation to seeing Dad prepare the specific martini, to the split-second decision to switch glasses with Brandon. I have chemistry training, I explained. I recognized the symptoms when they started. I never thought he would use something potentially lethal, but I couldn't be sure. And why would your parents want to poison you? She asked carefully. Money, I replied simply. Control. My grandmother left me a trust worth approximately $15 million that activates next week. If I died before then, it would revert to my parents. They also recently discovered I have evidence of their company's environmental crimes, and they believe I might expose them. Detective Santos's expression didn't change, but she wrote something and underlined it twice. That's a serious accusation. I know, I said quietly. I have the video my friend took of the toast. You can clearly see my father giving me a specific glass and my decision to switch with Brandon. You can also interview Professor Thompson, who's aware of tensions within my family and the company. A knock at the door interrupted us. Dr. Williams entered with a tablet. We have preliminary toxicology results, she announced. We found elevated levels of a modified benzodiazepine compound similar to, but not identical to, standard formulations. It appears to be a research compound not yet in commercial production. Detective Santos looked between us. In English, please? It's a laboratory-created drug that would cause symptoms mimicking severe food poisoning, but with additional cardiovascular effects, I explained. Exactly the kind of compound someone with access to research facilities would have. Only someone with connections to pharmaceutical or chemical research would have access to this. Will he be all right? I asked Dr. Williams anxiously. We're administering flumazenil as an antidote, she replied. His condition is serious but stable. If we hadn't identified the compound quickly, there could have been permanent heart damage. I closed my eyes briefly, relief washing over me. Thank you. When I opened them, Detective Santos was studying me carefully. You realize that by your own admission, you knowingly allowed your brother to drink what you suspected was poisoned alcohol? My stomach dropped. I didn't know what else to do in that moment. I needed evidence. I thought it was just enough to make someone sick, not life-threatening. My voice shook slightly. I made a terrible decision, and I'll have to live with that. Before she could respond, The door burst open and Dad stormed in, followed by a flustered officer and a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit. "This is outrageous," Dad shouted. "My daughter is clearly mentally unstable and jealous of her brother's success. She's been making wild accusations about our family for years." "Mr. Mitchell, I must ask you to step outside," Detective Santos said firmly, standing. "Richard Mitchell, do not say another word," the suited man instructed, placing a hand on Dad's arm. "I'm Marcus Rivera, the Mitchell family attorney. My client has no comment at this time." "Your client isn't under arrest yet," Detective Santos emphasized the last word. "But I suggest he cooperate fully. We have video evidence of the martini toast and preliminary toxicology reports, confirming a research-grade compound in Brandon Mitchell's system." Dad's face went through a rapid series of emotions before settling into cold fury. "Sarah has always been troubled," he said, his voice suddenly calm and reasonable. "She's been jealous of her brother, resentful of our expectations. She's threatened before to destroy our family business out of spite." "That's not true," I protested. "We indulged her environmental science whims despite her responsibilities to the family company," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "We even threw this expensive graduation party to show our support. And how does she repay us? By creating this elaborate drama and allowing her own brother to become ill." Marcus Rivera placed a business card on the table. "Detective, we'll cooperate fully with your investigation, but any further questions should come through me. The Mitchell family is prominent in this community, and we expect discretion." After they left, Detective Santos picked up the card with 2 fingers as if it might be contaminated. "Interesting family you have, Miss Mitchell." "You have no idea," I replied, wearily. A commotion in the hallway drew our attention. Professor Thompson had arrived and was arguing with the officer outside Brandon's room. "I'm a family friend," he insisted. "I need to see how he's doing." Detective Santos and I stepped out as Professor Thompson spotted me. "Sarah, thank God, what happened? They're saying your father tried to poison you?" Before I could answer, Dr. Williams emerged from Brandon's room. "He's asking for you, Sarah. He's still groggy but lucid." Entering the dimly lit hospital room, I felt a wave of guilt seeing Brandon connected to monitors, an IV in his arm. His normally perfect appearance was disheveled, his skin still holding an unhealthy pallor. His eyes fluttered open as I approached. "Hey," I said softly, taking his hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," he replied, his voice raspy. "They told me, is it true? Did Dad really try to poison you?" I nodded slowly, tears filling my eyes. "I'm so sorry you drank it instead. I just reacted. I didn't think—" "Why?" he whispered, confusion and pain clouding his eyes. "Why would he do that?" "The trust from Grandma Eleanor. The EPA investigation. They were afraid I would expose the environmental violations at the company." Understanding dawned in Brandon's eyes. "The sealed reports. The ones they've been keeping on the secure server." He squeezed my hand weakly. "I saw them last month but didn't understand what I was looking at. Heavy metal readings, disposal records." "They've been dumping construction waste directly into protected watersheds for years," I confirmed. A soft knock interrupted us as Detective Santos entered with another plainclothes officer. "Miss Mitchell, we've just received some additional information I thought you should know. The EPA has been investigating Mitchell Properties for the past 8 months for fraud, environmental violations, and falsification of permit applications." I stared at her. "The EPA?" "Yes. Your parents were already under federal surveillance when we contacted them about the poisoning incident. They've shared that they have substantial evidence of criminal activity. They're executing search warrants at your family's offices and home as we speak." Brandon's monitors beeped as his heart rate increased. "Oh my God," he whispered. "I signed off on some of those documents. Dad said they were routine regulatory filings." "We'll need to speak with you about that later, Mr. Mitchell," the other officer said. "For now, focus on your recovery." As they left, Brandon began to cry quietly. "I trusted them completely. I defended them whenever you complained about how they treated you. And all this time," I held his hand tightly, "you didn't know. They manipulated both of us, just in different ways." "What happens now?" he asked, fear and uncertainty replacing his usual confidence. "Now we tell the truth," I replied simply. "All of it." The story broke in the Hartford Courant 2 days later. Connecticut real estate CEO and wife arrested for attempted murder of daughter. Smaller headlines added, EPA uncovers massive fraud and environmental crimes at Mitchell Properties. Our family name, once synonymous with success and philanthropy, became overnight shorthand for corporate greed and familial betrayal. I moved temporarily into Jessica's apartment, unable to face returning to my own place, where reporters lurked constantly. Brandon remained in the hospital for 4 more days before being released into the care of our Aunt Margaret, Mom's estranged sister, who flew in from Portland upon hearing the news. I always knew Patricia was capable of terrible things, Aunt Margaret told me over coffee in the hospital cafeteria. But I never imagined this. I should have stayed in touch with you kids better. The investigation expanded rapidly. With search warrants in hand, the EPA and FBI discovered a trove of incriminating documents at both the Mitchell offices and our family home. Emails detailed systematic falsification of environmental impact studies for 5 major developments currently under construction. Water testing showed years of illegal toxic waste disposal that had contaminated groundwater in communities near 3 different resort sites. Detective Santos kept me updated on the poisoning case. The lab confirmed the compound was an experimental benzodiazepine derivative from a research facility your father has contracts with, she explained during one of our meetings. He signed it out personally 3 days before your graduation. We also found notes in his home office detailing dosage calculations. I worked with the authorities, providing everything I knew about the company's operations and my parents' behavior. Days blended together in a haze of police interviews, meetings with prosecutors, and checking on Brandon's recovery. A week after the incident, I met with Special Agent Rebecca Donovan from the FBI at her request. She spread photographs across the table between us. Do you recognize this location? She asked. I studied the images of what appeared to be a storage unit. Inside were boxes of documents, several laptop computers, and most disturbingly, vials of various compounds carefully arranged in temperature-controlled containers. No, I replied. I've never seen this place. It's a storage unit rented under your name, she said, watching my reaction carefully. Opened 6 months ago with what appears to be a forged signature. My blood ran cold. They were planning this for months, setting me up in case their original plan failed. It appears so, Agent Donovan agreed. We found evidence on your father's computer of multiple contingency plans. The poisoning attempt was actually Plan C. Plans A and B involved more elaborate setups that would have implicated you in corporate espionage and environmental terrorism. As the case built, more family secrets emerged. Financial records revealed my parents had been siphoning company funds into offshore accounts for years. Former employees came forward with stories of being fired after raising safety concerns. 3 families filed lawsuits, claiming their loved ones had died from cancer clusters near Mitchell Properties developments, health issues that my parents had deliberately concealed during environmental impact assessments. Through it all, Brandon and I grew closer than we'd ever been. The golden child facade crumbled as he processed his own sense of betrayal and manipulation. I was their puppet, he admitted during one of our long talks in his recovery room. Everything I did was to please them. My whole identity was built around being the perfect Mitchell son. You were also their shield, I pointed out gently. As long as you were the successful, obedient one, they could dismiss me as the problematic child, rather than questioning their own behavior. 2 weeks after the incident, we received word that our parents were being held without bail, after the judge deemed them flight risks due to their substantial overseas assets. Their preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. On the morning of the hearing, Brandon and I met for breakfast at a quiet diner far from the courthouse. He still moved carefully, his body not fully recovered from the poison. Are you ready for this? I asked, stirring my untouched coffee. No, he admitted, but we need to be there. I need to look them in the eyes. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters who shouted questions as we approached. Inside, the hearing room fell silent as we entered, all eyes turning to observe the poisoned son and the targeted daughter. Our parents sat at the defense table, both dressed impeccably despite weeks in detention. Mom's eyes filled with tears when she saw Brandon, but Dad stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge either of us. The evidence presented was damning. The prosecution displayed Jessica's video of the toast, showing clearly Dad giving me the specific glass, and my subsequent switch with Brandon. They presented the toxicology reports, the compound traces matching exactly to samples found in Dad's research contracts. Financial records demonstrated the motive, my trust fund that would have reverted to them upon my death. Most shocking to the courtroom spectators was a recorded phone call Dad had made from detention to a business associate, asking him to clean up the situation with those water samples, and mentioning that Sarah was always the problem child, never understanding family loyalty. When the judge ruled there was more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all counts, including attempted murder, Mom collapsed in theatrical sobs. Dad remained stone-faced, only his clenched jaw betraying his fury. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again. Brandon surprised me by taking my hand and addressing them directly. My sister and I are cooperating fully with authorities. We ask for privacy during this difficult time as we come to terms with our parents' betrayal. Thank you. As we pushed through the crowd toward our waiting car, a reporter called out, "Did you know your sister was switching the glasses? Were you part of the plan?" Brandon stopped cold, turning back with unexpected fire. "My sister saved my life. Our parents tried to poison her, and when she realized it, she had seconds to decide what to do. She's carried unnecessary guilt for my suffering, but the only people responsible are Richard and Patricia Mitchell. They were willing to kill their own daughter for money and to cover up their crimes. That's the story you should be telling." In the following days, more family members we'd barely known reached out. Cousins, distant aunts, Dad's brother who'd been ostracized from the family decades ago for questioning some of Dad's early business practices. It seemed our family tree was filled with similar stories of control, manipulation, and retribution against anyone who challenged the Mitchell way. Brandon and I began the painful process of separating ourselves legally and financially from our parents. We hired our own attorney, a brilliant but compassionate woman named Diana Foster, who helped us navigate the complexities of our situation. "Your grandmother's trust is secure," she assured me during one meeting. "The trustees have accelerated the transfer, given the extraordinary circumstances." "As for Mitchell Properties, that's more complicated," Diana continued. "The company will likely be dissolved, with assets seized by the government or directed toward victim restitution. But there's also the matter of your parents' personal assets. Much will be seized, but there will still be substantial holdings that would typically pass to you as their only children." I looked at Brandon, seeing my own conflict reflected in his eyes. "We need time to think about that," I said finally. "There's also the question of your futures," Diana added gently. "You'll both likely be called as witnesses in multiple trials. This process could take years." As summer progressed, the case against our parents strengthened. 3 former Mitchell Properties executives agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. Environmental testing confirmed widespread contamination attributed directly to improperly disposed construction chemicals. The estimated cleanup costs exceeded $200 million. In August, 3 months after the graduation party incident, Brandon and I returned to our childhood home with FBI agents to identify additional documents and evidence. Walking through the silent, imposing rooms felt surreal. Everything looked exactly as it always had, perfect, cold, and sterile. In Dad's study, agents were carefully cataloging the contents of his safe. "Miss Mitchell," one called, holding out a small leather journal. "Do you recognize this?" I took it carefully. The journal was old, the pages yellowed. Inside, I found my grandmother Eleanor's handwriting. It was a record of her own discoveries and concerns about the construction industry from decades earlier. The final entry, dated shortly before her death, read, "I have arranged for Sarah's financial independence. She alone has the conscience and strength to break the cycle of this family's poison." Tears filled my eyes as I showed it to Brandon. "She knew," I whispered. "She was trying to protect me all along." "And you protected me," Brandon replied, squeezing my hand. "That's what real family does." 6 months after that fateful graduation party, I stood on the deck of Grandma Eleanor's lake house, watching the November sun shimmer across the water. The property had been part of my inheritance, a peaceful retreat 2 hours outside Greenwich that I'd visited often as a child. Now it was my home, at least temporarily, as I figured out my next steps. The trust had been officially transferred to me 4 weeks after the incident, the trustees agreeing unanimously to expedite the process, given the extraordinary circumstances. The first thing I'd done was establish a separate fund for Brandon's ongoing medical care and therapy. Though he'd physically recovered, the psychological wounds ran deep. Hot chocolate delivery called a voice behind me. Brandon emerged from the house carrying 2 steaming mugs, bundled in one of my oversized sweaters. He'd moved in with me a month ago after selling his downtown condo, too full of memories of family business dinners and parental approval. Perfect timing, I smiled, accepting the mug gratefully. I was just thinking about how much has changed. Everything, he agreed, settling into the Adirondack chair beside mine. Remember when we used to come here with Grandma Eleanor? She'd let us stay up late watching the stars while telling us stories about women architects who changed the world. I remember Mom hating those trips, I laughed softly. She was convinced Grandma was filling our heads with dangerous independence. She was right about that at least. Brandon's smile turned contemplative. My phone buzzed with a text from Professor Thompson. Environmental firm interview went well. They were impressed by your research proposal on sustainable remediation. Call me for details. I smiled, showing the message to Brandon. After the dust had settled, I'd begun reaching out to environmental architecture firms specializing in remediation and sustainable development. My unique background, understanding both the construction industry and environmental science, made me qualified to work on cleaning up the kind of damage my family had caused. Brandon had his own healing journey. He'd resigned from Mitchell Properties immediately after being released from the hospital and had spent months helping authorities understand the company's operations. Now he was considering law school, inspired by the prosecutors and victim advocates he'd met through our case. The prosecutors called this morning, Brandon mentioned. They're offering a plea deal. My hands tightened around the warm mug. What kind of deal? 25 years for Dad on the attempted murder charge, plus the environmental crimes. 15 for Mom if she testifies about the corporate fraud. He paused. They want to know if we object. I stared out at the lake, watching an eagle circle lazily above the water. Do you? I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants them to face a full trial, to have everything exposed. But another part just wants it to be over. I understand, I finished for him. We sat in comfortable silence, a new dynamic for siblings who'd spent most of their lives as strangers occupying the same family space. The past months had forged a genuine bond between us, built on shared trauma but expanding into real friendship and trust. The house is being seized next week, Brandon mentioned, referring to our childhood home. They wanted to know if there's anything personal we want to retrieve first. I shook my head. Nothing I need there. What about you? I already took the photo albums, the real ones, not the staged family portraits Mom kept in the living room. The candid ones Mrs. Rodriguez used to take. Mrs. Rodriguez had been our housekeeper for 15 years, the closest thing to a loving maternal figure we'd experienced daily. Have you heard from Mrs. Rodriguez? I asked. She's in Florida with her daughter. She sent me a care package last week with homemade cookies and a note saying she always knew we'd break free eventually. The criminal proceedings continued their slow progression through the justice system. Our parents maintained their innocence publicly, while their attorneys negotiated frantically behind the scenes. The evidence was overwhelming, with new details emerging regularly as former employees came forward. Most painfully, we discovered through corporate emails that our parents had known about the environmental contamination for over a decade. Communities downstream from their construction sites had experienced elevated cancer rates and birth defects. Information my parents had systematically suppressed through confidential settlements and manipulated studies. I channeled my anger into action, establishing the Eleanor Whitman Foundation with part of my inheritance, dedicated to providing healthcare and environmental testing for affected communities. It couldn't undo the damage, but it was a start toward making amends for the Mitchell legacy. The media gradually lost interest in our story as newer scandals emerged, allowing us precious anonymity to rebuild our lives. I began volunteering with a water quality monitoring program at the lake, finding healing in the simple act of protecting something beautiful. On a cold January morning, exactly 8 months after the graduation party, Brandon and I sat in the courtroom as our parents accepted their plea deals. They looked smaller somehow, their designer clothes replaced by muted business attire, their imperious demeanor diminished by months in detention. Mom wept quietly as the judge detailed her crimes, while Dad remained stoic, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. Neither of them looked at us, their children sitting in the gallery. When asked if they wanted to make statements before sentencing, Mom declined through her tears. Dad stood, and for a brief moment, I thought he might express remorse. Instead, he spoke about his lifetime of contributions to Connecticut's economy, and how he'd always done what was necessary to protect jobs and growth. He described himself as a victim of changing regulatory standards and expressed hope that history would judge him more fairly than this court. Not once did he acknowledge the communities his company had poisoned, the families harmed by falsified environmental reports, or his attempt to murder his own daughter. In his mind, he remained justified, a man who'd merely done what was necessary. As the bailiff led them away to begin their sentences, I felt a complex wave of emotions: sadness for what our family could have been, anger at their continued refusal to take responsibility, but predominantly an overwhelming sense of relief. It was finally over. Outside the courthouse, away from the small cluster of reporters, Professor Thompson waited with Jessica and a growing circle of friends and colleagues who'd become our support system. "How are you feeling?" Jessica asked, hugging me tightly. "Free," I replied simply, like I can finally breathe. In the months that followed, Brandon and I continued our separate but intertwined healing journeys. We sold most of our parents' personal assets, directing the proceeds toward a victim compensation fund. I accepted a position with Green Futures Architecture, a firm specializing in environmental remediation and sustainable development. My first major project was designing an eco-friendly community center on land that had previously been contaminated by one of my family's developments. Brandon started his first semester of law school, determined to specialize in environmental law and corporate accountability. We kept the lake house as our shared refuge, a place that held happy memories untainted by our parents' influence. Sometimes we'd sit on the dock, talking late into the night, processing our complicated grief for the family we'd lost and the one we'd never really had. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" Brandon asked me one evening as we watched the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. I considered the question carefully. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. I've accepted what happened and who they are. I've released the anger because carrying it was only hurting me. But forgiveness feels like it requires repentance from them, and I don't think they're capable of that. He nodded thoughtfully. I keep thinking about nature versus nurture. Were they born this way, or did something make them like this? And either way, what does that mean for us? "It means we have choices," I said firmly. "Their blood runs in our veins, but their values don't have to run in our hearts. We get to decide what kind of people we become." A year after the graduation party, I stood at a podium addressing a conference on sustainable architecture and environmental justice. As I discussed innovative approaches to remediation and green building practices, I caught sight of Brandon in the audience, proudly recording my speech on his phone. Beside him sat Professor Thompson, Jessica, and a growing circle of friends and colleagues who'd become our chosen family. The journey had been painful beyond imagination, but standing there, I realized I'd found something I'd never experienced in the Mitchell household: genuine belonging. Not based on compliance or achievement or genetic connection, but on mutual respect, shared values, and authentic care. My parents had seen me as a problem to solve, a threat to eliminate. They'd tried to poison not just my body, but my spirit, my independence, my very sense of self. In choosing to fight back and refusing to become either victim or villain in their narrative, I discovered my own strength and purpose. The inheritance my grandmother left me was valuable, but her true gift had been believing in my capacity to break the toxic cycle. That faith had saved my life, and now it was shaping my future. So if you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. I know it's been a lot, but I wanted to share this because I know there are people out there dealing with their own toxic family situations. Maybe not as extreme as mine, but toxic nonetheless. Here's what I've learned. Family isn't just about blood. Family is about the people who support you, who believe in you, who want you to succeed even when it's not convenient for them. Sometimes those people share your DNA, and sometimes they don't. If you're in a situation where family members are trying to control you, manipulate you, or harm you in any way, please know that you deserve better. You deserve people in your life who celebrate your achievements, not tear them down. You deserve love that doesn't come with conditions. And if you're struggling with guilt about setting boundaries with family members, remember this. Protecting yourself from toxic people isn't selfish. It's necessary. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you can't help anyone if you're being destroyed in the process. Brandon and I still have hard days. We're still in therapy, still processing everything that happened. But we're building something new together, a family based on choice, respect, and genuine love. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content about healing, recovery, and building the life you deserve. And in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. What's helped you deal with difficult family situations? What advice would you give to someone just starting their journey away from toxicity? Remember, the most powerful antidote to poison, whether it's in a martini glass or in the words of someone who's supposed to love you, is truth. Your truth, your voice, your choice to say no more. Thanks for being here with me today. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember, you're worth fighting for.